Hey everyone, I'm Mr. E.
And I'm Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man. We are
Today we're
also part
talking
of the
about,
Manosphere, but that will come in later.
yeah, that's today's topic. We are talking about the Manosphere, basically the sphere of the internet where uh, people talk about men's issues, men's rights, how to help guys, meet with women, men's self improvement, that kind of thing. So we're talking about,
Male focused ideologies aplenty. So your MRAs, your MGTOWs, your incels, your PUAs, um, uh, uh, the sort of trad male like reject modernity, embrace masculinity sort of people. Although if you put a gun to my head, I would put those guys and the PUAs more on the fringes of the manosphere because it really does mostly just reinforce like the traditional notion of man, you are judged by your utility to women, so be as useful as possible to women. And it's like, I get where you guys are coming from because I suppose that is an option, but I'm not sure that's helping because that seems to just inflame the problem ultimately.
I think that's actually being flipped on its head quite a bit, and we'll get into that later. But I think the first part of the metaphor we should talk about is the MRA sphere, the men's rights activists.
Yeah, which I think is more at least where I'm coming from more than anything. Because the way I see it, the biggest problem with the modern world is that the last century was basically the women's rights movement nonstop. And that was fine in theory. It's just that they tried to conflate women's rights with human rights, and that is also fine. But if you're going to invest women with all these sorts of new privileges, if we truly want to be equal and we truly want to have universally applicable human rights, then someone somewhere is going to have to start extending at least some of that to the male half of the species at some point.
Not just that, but they were arguing for women's rights to be the same as men without also having to take on the responsibility that those rights came with.
Well, because as I think we touched on a little bit last week, I think when they say they want equality to men, they don't mean male humans. They mean what traditionalists would define as real men, or what female dating strategies might define as high value men. They think that in order to be a man, you must be that top 20% of male humans that women are actually interested in, and or the top 1% of that 20%. So they want every female human to be equal to somebody like Jeff Bezos, or um, the folks from Silicon Valley, or George Soros and the like, without the work, because they think that the masculine tendency of tying things to practical matters, or concrete matters, is actually what makes masculinity toxic. So they want women to have all the privileges of someone like a Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos without any of the obligation to work. I
Yeah,
think is
they want what they want is the lifestyle that those type of people are able to lead, but they have those lifestyles because they work their asses off in order to
yeah.
attain them.
They want
Um,
all the powers of the aristocracy with none of the noblesse oblige of the aristocracy.
and while I agree that Jeff Bezos has basically devolved into a supervillain, I um I have to acknowledge that he did work hard in order to get to that position.
I mean, Machiavelli backstabbing does take a lot of work. I mean, it may be duplicitous and evil, but it's hard duplicitous and evil. So there's that. Although I think in the hierarchy of supervillains, most of the people from Silicon Valley are actually like B tier supervillains, because you've I've actually seen in several cases George Soros randomly show up on Facebook and scold Mark Zuckerberg, which tells you that the publicly available supervillains like the Silicon Valley types, of which Bezos would be a member, are actually sort of below the rung of your Guy Verhofstadt, Klaus Schwab's, and George Soros's. I think
All right,
those guys are the
let's
cream of the supervillainous crop.
let's not get off to. We can do the duality of man and global elitism another day because that should be a topic.
Duality of man and aristocracy. Yeah, that's gonna be I foresee that being a thing. Anyway, Manosphere. Yeah,
Yeah, so men's rights activists are people who look at today's society, see that laws are heavily stacked against men, especially in areas regarding family, and are actively protesting, trying to call attention to, and attempting to change said laws. But they're facing with a lot of opposition because even when they want to do something that, you know, they hold an event to talk about the issues, or somebody tries to build a shelter for men who are suffering from domestic abuse, they usually are met with a lot of pushback, a ridiculous amount of pushback for what they're doing.
because I think once again we have to look at sort of the instinctive backdrop of these things, because I think the ultimate cut and thrust of it is men are valuable for their utility. So the idea that we should value men for something other than their utility, the fact that we should value men for like personal or universalist or sentimental reasons like we do women, fucks with a lot of people's heads, especially when you consider the patriarchy hypothesis, because they assume, by reason of their own abstraction, that men already have all the power that one could possibly ever want, because they only considered the men that count to be the top 1% of the top 20% of men. Um, and so to say those people need more rights is like, in the feminist and extremely gynocentric traditionalist mindset, is like saying you want to give the power of you want to give people who already have all the power. And it's like, no, in actuality, if you look at it historically and evolutionarily, I'm not going to say men have had no rights whatsoever, but for a long time, no one had any rights. And men are a lot closer to their original status from the caveman days than women are, because we spent the last century or so hefting any rights we could think of onto women. And men, I'm sure they already have them, never mind.
Yeah, regarding the patriarchy, my view on it has always been that it's a load of crap. It's because men and women both have power, but it's different kinds of power. Men usually have what's called a hard power, like raw physical strength, while
Concrete
women,
power.
yeah, while women usually have soft power, which is the ability to get others and to do what you want. And I am willing to bet you everything I own that women throughout history constantly have used that soft power to direct men's hard power.
I'm not even sure it's useful to categorize it as soft and hard. I more define it as overt and covert. Because the thing is, it's not like women's power of social proof or moral pecking order is inferior in any way to men's hard power, especially when you consider that men are very often raised by their mothers for the first few years of their lives. And as Aristotle put it, give me the child until he is 7, and I will give you the man. Well, most children from in that age bracket, from time immemorial, have been raised primarily by their mothers, and only then, once they reach that level of maturity, do they get exposed to their fathers and the hunter-gatherer lifestyle in the old days, and the business and work lifestyle in the more current days. So, what does that tell you about the way men view women? It tells you, or at least it implies to me, that people have a slavish devotion to their mothers and sisters and view other men as mentors or combatants, if they're lucky. And sometimes far worse, as we know from the various cultures of war and also the modern feminist uh, diatribes.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a slavish devotion. I mean, particularly in regards to family, because like family is a unit that where people come together for mutual benefit. Family benefits each other, so I wouldn't necessarily call it a slavish devotion. But I
Well, what I mean to imply there is that it's disproportional when you consider it in relation to, for example, the devotion a boy has to his father or brothers. He's far more likely to have a stronger emotional and primal connection to his sisters and his mother it, because you honestly have to reason a young boy into loyalty to his father and brothers. The loyalty to mother and sister hits you right in the emotional epicenter there. Again,
well,
before children have the opportunity to develop reasoning skills from the ages of like 1 to 7, they are nurtured by their mothers, and only then are they close to their fathers, even in highly traditionalistic societies.
I would say that because children are reared by their mothers so very young that their devotion to them is deeply ingrained. Yes, but I wouldn't say that the bonds they have with their fathers or brothers are necessarily not as strong because those are forged through experiences and just personally speaking, those bonds can be incredibly strong,
No,
especially
they, they,
say like
they they can be, but my point is you have to put work into them, whereas you don't have to put nearly as much work into the devotion to mother, because a boy's mother, or a girl's mother for that matter, is very often their first exposure to what it means to be a human. And that's not something that can be socially engineered out of them. The most it can be is balanced out, which
well, isn't
even
that just
then,
well, isn't that just nature? Women are biologically predisposed to the raising of children, especially in early years.
well, but that's what I'm saying. Women have a natural advantage when it comes to the devotion of their sons, and also their daughters. And you see this reflected in the research. We've already gone over several times that men have an outgroup preference, generally speaking, which means that on balance, male humans would rather spend time with female humans, whereas female humans have an in-group preference, which means that on balance they would rather spend time among each other rather than men. You would think in a egalitarian species, both species would or both genders would either have a in-group preference because camaraderie, or an out-group preference because pair bonding and breeding. But in human civilization, as far as we can tell, men have an out-group preference and women have an in-group preference.
Let's talk about the groups in the MRA sphere. Um, Obviously, there is the I believe the website MRM Men's Rights Movement.
I've never spent a bunch of time there, actually. To be fair, most of my exposure to the MRM has been through various personalities on YouTube, whether it's Paul Elam and Tom Golden and Janice Mango on Men Are Good and In Here for Men, or whether it's the Honey Badgers. I think on balance, I spend more time with either the Honey Badgers or Honey Badger adjacent people, like Karen Strawn, for example. And I think that that's probably not unusual among the MRM, which is kind of funny that for all of the they're misogynist. Some of the largest um some of the largest players in the MRM are women.
Yeah. Speaking of members of the MRM who are women, have you heard of a YouTube channel called Just Pearly Things?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Well, it's run by a woman named Pearl, who's around our age, and she talks a lot about men's issues. She does a lot of advocating for men. She talks about how men are disadvantaged in society. It's a really good channel. You should check it out sometimes.
I will add that to the list. There are so many things I need to get caught up on. Quite frankly, I also need to get caught up on my notifications in the actual Honey Badger Discord, which I'm a part of, because Allison is actually writing a book, and she does like semi-weekly writing workshops, and I'm in that notification sphere, but I very rarely get a chance to check back at it.
See, Nelson the Gentleman as a comment. When we all inevitably get locked in cages and milked for our sperm in the upcoming feminazi utopia, we should not be downtrodden because we'll get to look at women as they walk by and cattle prod us.
I mean, that seems to be kind of the PUA approach to this in a lot of ways, which is why I don't disavow PUAs for the most part. I might disavow individuals within the PUA sphere like Bruce Lee because he's a putt, but um, I don't think that the PUA sphere is exactly helping. I think in many ways the PUA sphere is just a male attempt to fall in line and exacerbate the problem.
Hmm. Let's see. Is there any other thing you want to talk about regarding men's rights activism?
Um, well, there was one thing, and the thing that ultimately convinced me to strictly speaking identify myself as an MRA, because for a while there, I, like a lot of people, I think identified more as an anti-feminist and didn't really consider myself an MRA. Um, the thing that ultimately convinced me to consider myself an MRA was number one, learning things about history that I didn't previously know. For example, the history of the first wave of feminism and how it isn't the sunshine and rainbows that even a lot of anti feminists seem to think it was. Um, and also learning about ways in which men have not just been disadvantaged in the modern world, because I think a lot of particularly anti-feminists are of the opinion that at one time in our history men weren't disadvantaged like the way they are now. But one of the things that ultimately convinced me to sort of consider myself part of team men's rights movement was realizing that while the problem has certainly gotten worse in recent years, it is not a new problem. Like as I alluded to earlier, for the longest time in human history, no one had rights because rights were kind of an affectation of classical liberalism and the Enlightenment and so on. But men are a lot closer, even still, to the position they were in many thousands of years ago than um, than women. And and the other thing is one of the things that made me kind of one of the things that kind of red pilled me was realizing that some of the ways in which we quote unquote disadvantage women was actually an affectation of trying to give women a privileged position and basically treating them as much like the aristocracy as any given civilization can afford to, even in the so-called misogynistic spheres of the Muslim world.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
they
remember.
go ahead.
I remember when I first heard about the suffragette movement, and you know, not only that, but also the women's right to work movement. I'm like, these women were actually advocating to have to go out and seek employment. They wanted to work. Work sucks. Nobody wants to work. You
Yeah,
need to.
this whole thing of to work is a privilege. I'm like, are you high? Because it strikes me that this is something you could only believe if you've either been sheltered beyond all reason in your life or have recently suffered several thousand blows to the fucking head. No one would, no one prefers to. Okay, well, I'm not gonna say no one prefers to work because there are jobs that, on balance, I think people would choose to do if they had not if
Well, here's the thing:
all
jobs
other
like that
things
are
were
usually
equal.
things that people would do for free, and then if I get paid for it, then that's just gravy. Like people who like follow their passion, like
Yeah,
carpentry or
but for every one of those jobs, the jobs that are intellectually and spiritually and physically edifying, there are 100 jobs that we literally used to make slave classes do because they were detrimental to human health and the health of the people that actually did them. Like for like for example, mining and roof tiling and sewage work and so on. Like these are jobs that we used to reserve for the lowest rungs of society because it was understood that no human being worth anything should have to actually do this. The only difference was we eventually, rightfully in my opinion, came to the conclusion that no one should be enslaved and that everyone is in some way worthwhile. But unfortunately, as a result of that necessary leap forward, and it was very necessary, we kind of re-emphasized our blind spot when it comes to men's inherent worth because again we see men mostly as a means to an end rather than an end in itself, and this I still find to be a inhumane piece of shit regardless of the motivations we have behind it. For example, we we used to what is the phrase, re- remove the genitals of, and I can't remember the word. We used to essentially neuter male slaves. Um,
castrate.
thank you, I couldn't think of it. Yeah, we used to castrate male slaves, and I hate to break it to you guys, but as long as male circumcision, especially infant male circumcision, is still a thing, we're still fucking doing it. We're just doing it more subtly. And unfortunately, doing a pernicious thing more subtly does not make it less inhumane. It just means you're craftier at doing it. And I still hold to the position of we should fucking stop this, please.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I didn't go through that, but I can understand how it could be incredibly difficult
Yeah. Yeah,
going
no, and
forward.
I don't have any personal stake in the matter either. I'm just saying if it's something that we would look down on the third world for doing to anyone else, and it's something that we once did to our slaves, then why the fuck are we making it okay to medically do it to young infant boys? Keeping in mind that we've outlawed the equivalent for infant girls for centuries here in the West, and rightfully so, in my opinion. I would just like to quick and drag that principle of no one should have to go through this to all the humans instead of just the female half, please.
Yeah. Um, I want to move on to the next section because we're on at
Yeah,
225.
there's a quite diverse manosphere out there to be had. So yeah,
Yeah. So the next part of the manosphere I want to talk about is MGTOW, and recently I found MGTOW to be the largest growing section of the manosphere. I
but
feel like more men are becoming, disillusioned. They're seeing that the things that they were always told when they were young men are absolute lies, and instead of trying to change the system or adapt to the system, they're just saying, "I'd rather not play this game at all. I'd rather
yeah,
take my money and my time
I
and."
think I think if you wanted to phrase it, MRAs are the ones who are looking at the system and going, I'm sorry, I'm not playing this game because this game is rigged and fucked. So we need to fix it. PUAs are the ones who are going, this game is rigged and fucked, but I'm still gonna find a way to to essentially game the system. And MGTOWs are the ones who are just like, I don't want to. I don't want to go through the effort of trying to fix it, or I can't see how to go through the effort of trying to fix it. So I'm just going to opt out entirely. And then incels are the ones who are involuntarily kicked out of the system. They're trying to make the system work and it's not working. So they either
They're the ones who
uh,
are trying to read the rules, don't understand what's going on, and they're banging their heads against the
yeah,
wall.
and yeah, either they're going to find their way to the PUAs and start gaming the counter gaming the system, or they're going to remain just sort. I guess you could call it MGTOWs are the men who go through the shit that incels go through and choose to opt out, whereas incels are the ones who are sort of involuntary MGTOWs. They're the men forced their own way.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, MGTOW is men going their own way. It's men choosing not to engage in dating and relationships and marriage, because either they just couldn't figure it out, or they thought that they had figured it out, went through something absolutely horrific, and have just said, "I'm not doing this anymore." There are some really, really bad horror stories out there. I've seen videos, testimonies of soldiers who, while they're overseas fighting for their country, their wives are back home cheating on them. I once saw a TikTok video of this guy who was a soldier. He came back and discovered that his wife was pregnant by his stepfather. Yeah,
I
yeah, as you can
yeah,
imagine, he ended up getting divorced.
I mean, we've already done one on Men in War, and we've already talked about the draft, but something I feel it's necessary to bring home just to prove the historical that this mistreatment of men is not fucking new thing. When in every society that's ever offered a vote, the vote has come with the obligation of the draft. Except, of course, for when women in the West wanted the vote. They got the vote without the draft. Because it used to be that the vote and the draft were inextricably linked in a kind of Faustian bargain, whereby if you want the vote, you have to agree to potentially go off and die in a ditch somewhere on our say so. Whereas when women requested the vote, it was like, yes, you will be given the vote sans draft because you are too worthwhile to send off to die in a ditch somewhere. And I don't mind that. It's just that I mind that everyone else is still obligated for the Faustian bargain. Personally, I'm of the opinion that the vote should just kind of be guaranteed in democratic civilizations or democratic republic civilizations, and no one should be obligated to go off and die in a hole involuntarily. If they choose to sign up for warfare, then by all means, I'm not saying ban people from signing up for war. I'm just saying that there's a difference between willing conscription and the draft. And either women should also be subject to the draft, or more ideally, no one should be. Because
Um,
the bargain of your vote is inexorably tied to your willingness to sacrifice your life and soul is not a balanced argument or a balanced bargain, in my opinion. It's not worth it.
yeah, um, this is just incredibly disrespectful to the people who risk their lives for their nations, and you could imagine that the bare minimum that they required, like of their wives or girlfriends, was for them to be loyal to them, and they absolutely freaking failed. If you want to check out stories like that, there is a channel that I would suggest called a it's called a Strong Successful Male. Uh, the guy himself who runs it, he is a MGTOW. Like he said himself, like, I don't want to get married, I don't want to be in a relationship, I don't want children, I don't want to deal with that stuff. And he shares stories and advice for guys who are really going through some tough stuff because of relationships. And like people will send him their stories because they want his advice, and a lot of the stories are just freaking heartbreaking because like these guys do not deserve what these women do to them.
And once again, just to call back to the inequalities of women in such that they exist are usually more in an equivalent to aristocracy than it is to an oppressed class, because when women decided that they wanted the privilege of going off to war, not the obligation, mind you, not the responsibility, not the Faustian bargain like with men in the drafts, they just want the option of choosing to go and throw away their lives if they so choose. Meanwhile, they're still not addressing the issue of the draft, and they're still treating the obligations that men have because they're basically treated like a slave class as a privilege that is being denied to them because they are being protected from it. it's one thing to be an aristocratic class that's protected from all the hardships of the world. It's another to look at your incredibly aristocratic position of being denied the hardships of the world and saying, those hardships that other people have to endure, they're a privilege that is denied to me. Derp.
Though, let me ask you, what is your opinion on men who choose to go MGTOW? Do you think that they should have endeavored to change the system, or do you think that they're valid in their decision to just
I,
walk
I,
away
I,
from it?
I, th- I think the world would probably be better if more people went MRA than MGTOW, but I can't, in good conscience, say that it's a bad choice. It's kind of like, well, it would be admirable if every single man who was disadvantaged or every single black person that was disadvantaged by Jim Crow automatically went off and joined the civil rights movement and became the next Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King. You kind of have to be able to you kind of have to A, know what you're walking into, and B, be willing to stick to it regardless. And there is an argument for those the the Martin Luther Kings and the Rosa Parks to almost be delusional in some ways. Now, we're better off if they did do those things, and we're better off that there are people like Paul Elam and Tom Golden and Janice Fiamango and the Honey Badgers and Cassie J and Warren Farrell and all the rest of the figures in the men's rights movement that if I have my say so will be regarded like Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks come the next generation. But it's just a matter of do you choose to actively fight the system? Can you see it? And the other factor is, can you see a way to do so? Because I think there are a lot of people who are MGTOWs who have looked at the same data as the MRAs and just made the decision of, this is too much work. I can't suffer through what I've already suffered through and also throw myself into the men's rights movement meat grinder. I can't really fault them for that. Again, I think the world would probably be better off if more people went MRA than MGTOW, but just like the aforementioned analogy, if your approach to fighting Jim Crow is just opting out of the system entirely rather than joining a civil rights march, I honestly can't fault you for that.
Yeah, I can't really fault them either. I'm not a MGTOW. I haven't really been actively dating recently, but I'm more focused on improving myself. It's not that I've really just checked out of the dating scene entirely.
Your
But
approach is basically, let me level up first and then take another crack at this.
yeah,
You're
uh,
you're you're taking the classic gamer get good scrub approach first.
yeah. But it's really more for me than it is for any of the women out there. Nelson, the gentleman, says, "What the fuck is an MRA? MRA is a men's rights activist, somebody who's trying to, advocate for legal change,
Yeah,
um,
it
in
it
order
either
to,
mean it either means men's rights advocate activist or men's rights advocate. I prefer the term men's rights advocate, but that's mostly just because I don't feel I've done enough to be qualified as an activist. Um, and once I do, then maybe I will consider changing the A in my personal estimation. But for now, all I can meaningfully call myself is a men's rights advocate. I'm working on the activist part, but shit takes time, you know.
yeah, completely understand. But do you want to talk about PUAs next?
Yeah, I think of all the aspects of the manosphere, these are the guys who I most am am the most likely to disavow, just because their approach to the various fucked up ways that men are mistreated in civilization are just to either game the system entirely or mistreat others in the same way that, like, to rig the system so that it fucks over everyone instead of just men. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that's an option, but we could either, like, even the MGTOWs, I think, are now. Granted, there are some crazy people among the MGTOW movement who are straight up like burn it all to the ground male separatists, but those are few and far between. I think I I, I don't want to disavow any particular part of the manosphere because I think they all have their place. But if you put a gun to my head, which part of the manosphere I would want to see up against the wall first, it would be HEUAs. Because it's it's playing it's deciding to play the rigged game dishonestly rather than try to unrig it or even just opt out of it.
So, so PUAs, pickup artists, uh, who would you categorize in that area? I would definitely put Rouge V in that area.
I think Rouge V is probably the first of the like modern set that sort of because there have always been people whose approach to things have been like here's how you pick up women, but in terms of the modern semblance of the PUA that's like a reaction to men's issues and the current way of that civilization is going, I think Rouge V might be the first, or at least the most well known of the first wave of modern PUAs. Um,
Yeah,
I think there are a lot of sort of male life coaches that are sort of PUAs by proxy, if nothing else, because their approach to um, self help for men is more feeding into the utilitarian nature of what it is to be a man, i.e., the you're valued only for what you do, so do good things kind of thing. And honestly, I
well,
don't I don't fault that approach necessarily, but I think at the end of the day, if we're actually going to make some headway here, we have to deal with that issue. We have to deal with the you're only valuable for what you do rather than who or what you are thing. I'm not saying I'm not saying there's no value to what people do. In fact, I think women should be more held to the standard of utility. But I'm saying that we naturally we're naturally predisposed evolutionarily to seeing men as valuable for what they do in a utilitarian sense, and women as valuable for their like personhood and their emotions and their sentimental value. So if we truly want to balance this, we need to hold women to the standard of utilitarianism a little bit more and maybe lighten the load a little bit for men rather than forcing them further and further down the further towards the wheel of pain to make a Conan the Barbarian reference.
yeah.
Like push the wheel harder, faggot is the only approach that some people apparently can come up with, and I don't
As
think
somebody
that's
who,
entirely useful.
as somebody who myself was previously a part of this sphere, I gotta say that I feel like nihilism is a bit a part of it. Um,
Yeah, it's like,
you,
well, nobody's gonna make a better game, so I guess we just have to be better at playing the game we're dealt. Never mind that the game we're dealt is completely fucked and beyond all reason and unfair, but
yeah, and
who could
what I found is that PUAs promote engaging in obviously physical relationships with women, but they do dissuade against long-term, emotional relationships
yeah,
with women. And
they basically take the more parasitic parts of female hookup culture and they turn it back on itself. Rather than try to break the habit, rather than try to fix the problem, they just give they take what women give them and they give back as good as they get. And I have to once again bring up the question of if everyone is mistreating everyone else, is that really a solution to the problem? We could devolve into a situation where everyone is just mistreating everyone else, but that would result in everyone being mistreated. At some point, on some level, we might have to get to the point of maybe we should stop mistreating people. It reminds me actually a little bit of if anyone remembers the show Avatar: The Last Airbender, the episode The Great Divide. There's a scene in that where one of the tribes brings in food, and when asked why, even though they all know that bringing in food will result in a lot of them dying, it's literally, well, we thought the other tribe would bring in food because they assumed we would bring in food. And so, since they assumed we would bring in food and decided to bring food in anyway, we brought food in anyway. And it resulted in everyone breaking the necessary rules and everyone being mistreated horribly, rather than anyone stopping the situation and going, hold on, if we're all dehumanizing each other, maybe that will result in everyone being dehumanized. And given that we're all humans, wouldn't that be stupid?
Yeah. But another thing that I've noticed is that they don't really make a big push for the guys to improve upon themselves. Like they'll tell you to learn how to talk to women better. They'll tell you to dress better. But there's no real call for you to improve upon yourself as a person. It's really just about ultra these like
Women want the shiniest car, so you need to make sure your chrome is the shiniest of the car lot, basically.
yeah
Women want a fancy product, so you have to make yourself as fancy as possible. And again, it's back to the, well, if everyone sees men as valuable only as a means to an end and only as an appliance and a product, then we just need to make sure we're the best product. And it's like, or we could address the issue of men not being products? Question mark. That's where I come in. It's like, instead of playing this game that's really really fucked up and helps no one, could we maybe stop playing the game?
ironically, I believe it was, I think, a year ago, where Roosevelt himself came out and said that, yeah, that is not a good lifestyle. He himself turned away from it, even though he had led so many people, myself included, into it. I turned away a long time ago, but it is good to see that now he himself is realizing that it was a mistake.
Yeah, I'm glad that he came to his senses. Although I'm not sure I'm entirely I'm not sure his solution really helped much, because for all the positive aspects about religion and Christianity and whatnot, um, especially older religions are very, very gynocentric and very, very much prone to just another flavor of what I would consider the problem. For example, in the Bible, it says 1 Corinthians 7, verses 4 and 5 say that um, a woman is a woman's worth is tied inexorably to her husband, and then verse 5 basically mirrors that, but for the men being valued based on their wives. And that might be an egalitarian system. I'll give it that. It means that both parties are bound to each other, but I can't read that without realizing that that means that the value of both parties are entirely utilitarian, and no one is being valued for who and what they are. And I'm not sure that's exactly a solution, because it's like we can go to it's going from a system where women are the only valuable ones to a system in which no one is valuable, but they're at least tied together. And it's like, could we maybe send it back the other way to where both parties are valuable? Question mark. Again, maybe I'm a little bit too much of a lefty for this, and maybe I'm being a little bit too naive, and maybe I'm being a little bit too idealistic. But instead of the option of, you can either be a fundamental traditionalist, or you can get good at the new meta, I'm just like, maybe we could find a new paradigm entirely, instead of defaulting to the old paradigm or no paradigm at all. We could just find a new one.
Personally, my preferred paradigm would be where everyone's value is earned. I feel, because I feel like people should be judged on what they do and the choices they make. Everybody obviously would have a baseline value just for being a human being, but I think beyond that, like if you want people to treat you with respect, then that is something that you have to earn. You have to prove that you're somebody who's worthy of being respected.
But the thing is, I don't think we'll ever get away from that entirely because the world is just the way the world is, and evolution is a son of a bitch. But I do think that the previous century seeing women as sentimentally valuable was a good thing. I think the issue is the imbalance, i.e., the fact that we gave women all these fancy new toys, but we didn't give men jack shit, and in fact, we just made the burden on men more and more significant. I think my ideal future is I guess a more libertarian one where everyone is valued for both what they do and sentimentally as you know as a person or as a being in and of itself. Because I I think I think viewing someone's value as secondary to themselves in a supplemental way, i.e., in addition to their personal value, is good. But in very traditionalistic societies, no one had any intrinsic value, and everyone was only valuable as a glorified appliance. And I don't think that's the right way around. I think we need to move into a situation where our proclivities for utilitarian value and sentimental value are balanced so that women are held to a more utilitarian standard because we intrinsically hold them to a less utilitarian standard, and men are valued more sentimentally than they are now because our natural default emotion with regards to men is your only value is what you can do for me or what you function as. And I don't think that I think an ideal future is one in which both parties are valued for both what they do and who they are, rather than just defaulting back to your only worth is what you are or is what you can do rather than who you are. Again, maybe I'm being a little bit too much of a Gene Roddenberry fanboy here, but I can foresee a possible future, a libertarian, populist, humanist future where everyone is seen as valuable for both what they do and who they are, rather than just what they do or who they are.
To get back to talk about PUAs just for a sec, I personally, my personal experience is that it is fun in the short term. You will get attention from women. You'll have physical relationships,
Yeah, no, it works.
and for
The issue is not that it works, and that's part of what makes feminists and extremely gynocentric women pissed off. The fact that PUAs can actually manage to make this shit work, even though they think it's beneath them.
yeah, but the thing is, from my personal experience, I found that after a short period of time, you will end up not liking yourself because it turns you into a vapid shell of what an actual man is.
Yeah, as I pointed out earlier, if you buy into a dehumanizing framework where everyone is dehumanizing everyone else, you might wake up one day and realize that every single human within this system is dehumanizing every other human, despite the fact that we all know and agree that everyone is human. And that doesn't seem like the right way around for me. One a system in which everyone is miserable and everyone is vapid, while it might be egalitarian and it might be effective, doesn't strike me as the most substantive solution to the issue.
All right. Do you want to talk about um, you want to talk about the self improvement guides, the self improvement gurus, is you might want to call them. These are
Yeah,
typically I would classify like people like uh, Fresh and Fit and Andrew Tate into this category because they do because while they do talk a lot about getting women, the fact of the matter is most men do want women, but they also talk about improving yourself, like go to the gym, like work on your career, like invest, like save your money, like improve yourself, become the best version of yourself, and then you will be the prize. And then instead of women, dictating terms to you about interpersonal relationship, you will be in the power position where you will be the one who dictate terms. Like if a woman isn't on like your what you want, like on like your program isn't following like, you know, what you isn't if a woman isn't giving you what you want out of life, be either that like physical relationships
Yeah,
or like if you're a long term
in,
relationship
in a
guy.
in a more in a more meaningful sense of someone who's loyal, someone who's essentially worth the trouble, basically. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Um, I guess the main problem I have with these guys, apart from the crossover between them and PUAs, which I do kind of have an issue with, is
There is some. It's
it,
it's
it,
not one to one. There is
no,
some.
it's not one to one. I just I think that these guys are sort of the more mature or more developed version of PUAs. Which is still better than PUAs, don't get me wrong, but um the issue I have with these guys, I guess, is that their methods of self improvement aren't very individuated. Like my my approach is to view each individual person as with their own individual nature. And I think with these sorts of guys, they basically have a platonic ideal of the man that all men should aspire to in some way. And I'm like, my approach is more I guess Socratic and philosophical in the sense of you shouldn't be trying to be the man. You should be trying to be the best version of yourself individually, i.e., I am not a physical person really, in terms of my nature. So it would do me no good at all to become a gym bro because it would make me miserable. It would be a disservice to who I actually am, and it would frankly just look silly. Um, I, I,
I
I, I,
agree.
I think my main issue with these people is they're trying to they're trying to universalize male standards rather than individuate them, and I think in a lot of ways they can't help but fall back on the very traditionalistic, very gynocentric, very utilitarian approach of a good man is good at all of these various utilitarian things. Um, and
Well,
that's not
I do
exactly
admit
helping.
that they do that, but the standard that they get isn't something that they set. It's basically saying like, okay, these are the types of men that the vast majority of women are seeking. Like, if you want women, logic dictates this is the kind of guy
Yeah,
that you should.
you mold yourself to this standard because this is and again I guess my main issue is I still I still find the game to be fucked. So even playing into it in this more mature, more well-rounded way, it's just sort of like you're you're still playing into a system that needs to be overturned in some or at least adjusted significantly
Yeah,
before this will bear fruit.
I mean, they absolutely
I
need
find a
to
lot I
remove.
find a lot of cases where men will get into these like fresh and fit or Andrew Tate sort of guys, and they'll still wind up getting MGTOW'd or incel'd um, at the end of the day, and it'll make them even more angry because it's like I did all the things that logic dictates I was supposed to do. Why did this work? And the reason it didn't work is because the system is currently fucked. And unless we
Yeah,
address that
I mean,
issue, all this is so much throat clearing.
I mean, on their like live streams and stuff, they will absolutely admit that the system is fucked. They'll have a lot of women on, and they will explain to women how their view of men is absolutely unrealistic. They will talk like how most of the women are pursuing like the top 20% of men, and they even have this thing on their show called the female delusion calculator, which is based on the U.S. Census data. And what it does is women will put in the attributes that they want for a man, like he makes this so much money, he's this height, he's
Yeah,
this race, and then they will like calculate based
the
on the U.S.
various 6 feet tall, figure income 6 inches below the belt, and yada yada yada, and so on.
Yeah, they'll put that into a calculator based on the U.S. Census data, and then they'll give them a percentage of like how many men in the population fit that criteria. And usually the numbers are like incredibly small, like a percentage of a percentage.
Yeah, and
And this just goes to show that women do not know what men are actually like because they
well,
only get involved
again,
with
it goes
men.
back to goes back to what we were talking about last week. Of they only consider the valid men or the real men or the high value men, if you want to put it in female dating strategies terms, to be that percent. So, in extremely gynocentric women's minds or in extremely feminist women's minds, if men are men if the valid men are really that small a percentage of the male human population, then all the men just need to try harder. Basically, is the logic.
Yeah, and they really try and like show women what it's like to be a man. Like they'll often do exercises where the roles are reversed, where the woman has to pretend how to be a man and try to approach a woman and try and ask her out on a date. And women are always so terrible at it because they never even have to countenance, being the pursuer. They're always the
They
pursuer.
don't they don't
They have
know
to,
how the framework actually functions on the other end of it. They just know what their particular criteria are. And
yeah,
I just want to say, because I'm sure a bunch of people are listening to me sit here and badmouth the like self improvement community and the PUA community, and I'm sure some of them are literally thinking, "Oh, he's such a beta male. He's so gay and so on." And you're not wrong, because I actually am gay. I don't have to deal with this shit mostly. Um, Although, to be fair, the gay male community is a whole nest of vipers in and of itself, and a lot of it has to do with these very same lopsided standards, because it really is more of a masculine versus feminine thing than it is a female versus male thing, because we just talked about how the female delusion calculator and um the feminine women viewing the only valid man as that 1% of 1% of 1% of men. um there are a lot of feminine gay men who are very much the same way. And I will say for myself, and this is me being as self-aware as I can be, I do have a very hypergamous desire of men. Like, I prefer a man who is the various sixes. I don't really care so much about income, to be fair, though. My approach is, if I can find a man who is attractive and also attracted to me, us working together will figure the rest of that shit out. But I will say, yes, I have, as a gay man, I have high standards, and as a gay man, I have dealt with extremely feminine gay men who are insufferably feminine minded and hypergamous. So yes, I realize that some of my criticisms towards the male self improvement and male dating communities is going to ring hollow, because, well, you don't have to deal with that shit, Dalton. You're gay, and yeah, you're right. But I still think I have a point in some regard here.
yeah. That should absolutely be a topic that we go into depth on one of these podcasts. But
Men and homosexuality.
yeah, because I mean, what could be more of a men's issue?
Well, yeah, I mean that, and honestly, we could also go into a lot of the history of the societal views on homosexuality, because I think the feminist intersectional progressive stack thing has warped the way that people view gay male history. And if you actually look at the actual history, as in the people who opposed homosexuality in history and the reasons why they said they did, um, much much in the same way as the suffragette movement looks different if you view it through an actual historical lens. The opposition to homosexuality looks very different when you view it from an actual historical lens. But that's an issue for another day.
Yeah, I mean, regarding the the self improvement sphere of the manosphere. I would definitely say that everybody should try to improve themselves, but it's something that you should do because you want to improve. If you try to do it for like the goal of getting women, like I feel that you will get dejected fairly easily. But if you're doing it for you, then you'll be able to push through the times where
Yeah.
you don't want to do it. Because there are plenty of times where I don't want to go to the gym, but I still make myself go.
Mm-hmm. And here's the other thing, and I alluded to it a little earlier when I was talking about like the Socratic approach and the approach based on someone's individual nature. Don't improve based on someone else's hypothetical standards of improvement. Improve based on your standards. I feel like a broken record when I say this sometimes, but I operate on the old school like Socratic and Aristotelian approach of know thyself, i.e., figure out what your personal individuated nature is, and then figure out what is it that I am and how can I improve that thing, i.e., become kind of the Platonic ideal of your individuated self rather than trying to live up to this, you know, bronze sculpted man statue that everyone seems to hold themselves to some degree. Improve based on your standards and your nature rather than the nature that other people would project on you or force you into.
Yeah. If you try to do it, if you try to fit into somebody else's mold, usually it just will not work
Yeah.
because obviously you're not that person. Because as much as you might want to try and emulate them, like you have to try and maybe reach the same level, but in a way that's suited
To,
for you.
to paraphrase Marcus Aurelius by way of Dr. Hannibal Lecter, of each particular thing, ask what is it in itself. And I guess this is the main reason why I have such an issue with utilitarianism in general. The value of a given thing should be in the thing itself. It shouldn't be the thing as a means to an end or as an appliance. And that's true whether you're talking about art, because I think in today's day and age, both sides of the sort of academic intellectual compass with regards to art want to view art as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. You've got the Frankfurt School critical theorist types going, everything art is only valuable as a means to my socio-political and moral end. And then you've got the traditionalist side going, art is only valuable if it serves my Jungian archetypes. And I'm looking at that going, did no one, do you guys not see that you're basically operating in the same framework because you both see art as a means to an end rather than an end in itself? Has anyone tried seeing art as an end in itself lately? And I think that's true with most things in general. We, we always try to see things from like a utilitarian perspective, and even psychologists will often see this, and this is why I hate academic anthropology in a lot of ways, because they'll always ask the question of what utilitarian reason do these people have for believing this thing. It's never, do these people see the world in a different way than I see the world. It's always, what psychological abnormality can we project onto these people that makes them believing this thing okay? I think in most cases, and I think in a lot of ways philosophically, the world would be better off if we stopped seeing everything as a utilitarian means to an end or a functionalist thing and started asking the question of what is this thing in itself, and does this thing have any inherent worth in and of itself, rather than a utilitarian, how does it work, what does it do for this person functions.
As much as I agree that things should have inherent worth, I also believe that a person's true worth is what they can make of themselves. Because a diamond that is just mined out of the ground is valuable, but if you cut it and you polish it, it becomes more
That,
valuable.
yeah, and I'm not disputing that. I just think that culturally and philosophically, every part of our civilization has gotten so gung ho with utilitarianism, whether it's in the abstract or in the very literal sense, that they've all but forgotten the idea that things can be worthwhile in and of themselves. And I
Is there
think
any,
what I'm advocating for, just to be perfectly clear, is a balance between these two perspectives. I'm not saying no one should ever pay any attention to utilitarianism because that would be stupid. But what I am saying is what I have seen from more and more factions, even factions that are allegedly opposed to each other, is operating within the same framework of nothing has value in and of itself. Everything is to be valued as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. So we have to view everything from a utilitarian perspective. And I think in some ways that ultimately leads to nihilism or is a result of nihilism because you have to start from the premise of nothing has value in and of itself. Everything is only valuable as a means to an end. Everything's value is only as a relationship to something else or secondary to itself. And I don't believe that.
I agree. But is there any last words that you have for the self improvement section? Any final thoughts?
The key word of self improvement, I think, is self, i.e., don't hold yourself to some kind of universalistic standard. Go the Socratic and Marcus Aurelius route. Treat yourself like a particular thing which has a particular nature and therefore should be held to particular standards. Individuate, goddammit, I guess is the way I'm putting it.
Yeah. I would say that uh, make sure that after you improve yourself, that you know what you actually want out of say relationships, because a lot of the guys, even after they improve themselves, they still haven't necessarily figured that part out of it yet. So I feel like while you're like if you take it a step back and you're working on yourself, you should also try and figure out, okay, what is it that I actually want, not
Yeah.
just what do I
All,
want
all
on like a superficial level.
all of these things essentially boil down to my oldest chestnut, which is know yourself. Figure out who and what you are, who and what you want, or what and how you want, and go from there. Figure out yourself, and know yourself first because you are the lens through which you see the world. So if there's something wrong with that lens, nothing else you think is ever going to matter because if the self you're seeing the world through is fucked, then every assumption you make is also going to be fucked. So know yourself first and then let everything else follow from that self knowledge.
Okay, we've been at it for a little over an hour, and we've talked about I believe all the basic spheres of the manosphere. So I feel like this is a good time to end it. I hope this was informative for all the people who listen, because there are so many areas, and I do agree with Dolan that they all do have their place, and I feel like there is a bit of wisdom that you can get from all of them.
And I mean there is one last thing I guess we should touch on with the manosphere of the the outside of the manosphere loves to see the manosphere as everything wrong with civilization. They see it as misogynist, they see it as racist, they see it as hyper traditionalistic, they see it as every fucking thing under the sun that is negative. They see it as toxic, yada yada yada. Um, it should go without saying to some degree, but don't don't believe someone else's report on what something is. Actually go and investigate the thing in itself. I, and again, this is one of the reasons I hate anthropologists because they will never just take um, an account of what someone believes and say, well, that is an account of what someone believes. They will try and utilitarianize it or psychoanalyze it in some way. And I think most of the problems with the reporting on the manosphere is they the people who report on the manosphere from the outside can't tell the difference between how their own framework is internalizing this information and the information itself. The way they can't separate the subject matter itself from the way they choose to interpret it. and they refuse to distinguish between the thing in itself and the way I'm interpreting it, because they assume that their interpretation is automatically correct because they can't see any framework but their own as valid.
Yeah, most of the critics of the Manosphere are incredibly ideological, and a lot of people will um, talk about it. There have been a lot of negative articles written about it, but it's always people who have never actually engaged with it or engaged with anyone with it. Like, they'll never like talk to one of the people in the Manosphere and say like, give them like a proper interview. It's always like a gotcha in some way.
Or it will be buried under 5 layers of this is what this person says, but what do they actually mean? Interpret, interpret, interpret. Several more layers of interpreting. And then whoop, it turns out that according to my framework, anything outside my framework must be the devil. So even though they've said perfectly reasonable and salient things, they actually mean this straw man of the devil I've made up in my own head. It's very much the Kathy Newman Jordan Peterson treatment on math.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a fun episode. I've been Mystery.
I have been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator. We have been Duality Man. Cheers, guys.
Bye, everybody.